Welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories this hour. 9 are killed and 4 are injured after a Russian drone hits a passenger bus in northeastern Ukraine, hours after failed peace talks in Istanbul. The attack on Bilopilia follows a stalemate in Russia-Ukraine negotiations, though both sides agreed to a 1,000 prisoner exchange. Over 250 Palestinians are killed in Gaza since Thursday as Israel intensifies airstrikes and prepares for a new ground offensive, local health officials say. President Trump wraps up his Middle East tour with no ceasefire deal, but warns of a deepening hunger crisis and calls for urgent aid deliveries. Iran's foreign minister says Tehran has received no written US offer on its nuclear program, despite President Trump claiming they have a proposal. Abbas Araghchi posts on X to reject Trump's assertion, insisting there's been no direct or indirect communication in writing. Israeli airstrikes hit 2 Houthi-controlled ports in Yemen after missile attacks on Israel. Netanyahu warns of more to come. The Houthis confirmed strikes on Hodeidah and Salif, days after Tel Aviv accused them of using the ports for terrorist activities. The United States and Vietnam hold first ever ministerial trade talks as Washington weighs a 46% tariff on Vietnamese imports, potentially hitting Hanoi's economic growth. Meeting in Jeju after the APEC summit, both sides stress commitment to a stable economic and investment partnership. President Trump tears into the US Supreme Court after it blocks his migration deportation plan, calling it a dangerous day for America. He accuses the justices of stopping him from carrying out his elected mandate in a furious post on Truth Social. Singer Dawn Richard tells jury she witnessed Sean Diddy Combs beat then-girlfriend Cassandra Ventura, including dragging her by her hair in a 2009 incident. Richard backs Ventura's claims of years of abuse, describing screams and shattering glass from Combs' Los Angeles home. Supporters of Evo Morales rally in La Paz, Bolivia, demanding his return to the ballot after a court ruling blocks his 4th presidential bid. Bolivia's constitutional court upholds a 2-term limit, fueling fresh political unrest ahead of this year's election. Now, our top story: a Russian drone strike has killed 9 civilians in Ukraine's northern Sumy region on Saturday, targeting a bus and injuring 4 others. Ukrainian authorities called it a cynical attack, adding to the toll of a war that has dragged on for over 3 years. The deadly strike came just a day after Ukraine and Russia held their first direct peace talks in Istanbul since 2022. Despite high anticipation, the 90-minute meeting ended with little progress. The only firm outcome, a large-scale prisoner exchange with 1,000 detainees to be swapped on each side. Kiev pushed hard for an unconditional ceasefire, while Moscow stuck to hardline demands, including calls for Ukraine to cede more territory. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky accused Russian President Vladimir Putin of being afraid to attend the talks and warned that the Kremlin was not serious about peace. French President Emmanuel Macron said Europe and the US are preparing new sanctions in case Russia continues to reject a ceasefire. Let's listen in to all he had to say.
Aujourd'hui, ce qui reste d'actualité, c'est la seule proposition concrète qui a été faite, celle d'un cessez-le-feu inconditionnel. Nous continuons par ailleurs de préparer des nouvelles sanctions en coordination avec les États-Unis d'Amérique, au cas où ceux-ci ne trouveraient pas une réponse positive. Le président Trump compte, mais c'est sa responsabilité, il lui revient de le confirmer et de le dire, mais organiser des échanges dans les prochaines heures ou les prochains jours avec la partie russe pour pouvoir clarifier ce qui s'est passé et essayer d'avancer. Par ailleurs, la partie russe a promis un retour à la partie ukrainienne sur les propositions qui avaient été faites lors des échanges d'hier et de ce matin. C'est qu'on ne fasse pas croire à qui que ce soit qu'on pourrait reprendre les négociations d'Istanbul là où elles s'étaient arrêtées au printemps 2022. Parce qu'il y a eu entre-temps 3 ans d'une guerre terrible à laquelle les Ukrainiens ont résisté avec beaucoup de courage, un engagement de tous les Européens. Donc on ne fera croire à personne qu'on peut revenir au point où on en était.
Meanwhile, pressure mounts for direct engagement between Trump and Putin, with both sides suggesting a leader-level meeting is essential to breaking the deadlock. But with fresh attacks and zero movement on core issues, the path to peace still looks distant. We're now joined by our guest today to discuss this in further detail, Andrea Lucidi, who is a war reporter and is joining us from Moscow live. Thank you very much, Andrea, for joining us. This attack on a civilian bus by the Russian military comes just hours after peace talks closed in Istanbul. Was this Russia's opening statement to show their stance on the war currently?
Well, you know, such attacks are very common from both sides since the beginning of the war. And it's really complicated now to understand the dynamic of such attacks because very often it's possible that the beers of anti-air weapons will fall from the sky and hit some civilians target or civilians building. It's very common, unfortunately, in this war. Regarding the Istanbul negotiation, I think that we reach as a world a big objective, a big deal, because this is very important that the two sides can speak each other, because since 3 years nobody wanted to speak between Russia and Ukraine, and now we saw that the two official delegations meet each other in Istanbul and start a first step for future negotiation. Both sides yesterday declared that the first round of the meeting of the negotiation was ended, but it can be possible to meet, to organize a new meeting in Istanbul. And the Russian top negotiator, the head of the Russian delegation, say to the journalists that the Ukrainian conflict can have an end in weeks. So this is very, very important. Also, the American position, and this is important because Donald Trump agreed to meet personally Vladimir Putin in high-level meeting, and also the spokesman of the Kremlin, Dmitry Peskov, declared that such meeting is not only important, but it's necessary in this moment. So, and the biggest result of the yesterday negotiation in Istanbul, in my opinion, is the prisoner exchange. 1,000 prisoners of war from both sides will be exchanged very, very soon. This is a big amount. I don't remember such exchange of this amount of prisoners of war in the last 3 years. This can be not only a result, but also a message for both sides and both peoples, both population, Russian and Ukrainian. It's possible that I think it's real to think that the war can end in weeks if all this way will be followed.
Andrea,
like authorities planned.
Critics would say, to some of your points there, that Russia has been the one to deny the 30-day ceasefire proposal. Vladimir Putin declined. He didn't turn up to the talks. Zelensky invited him, and now Russia has bombed a civilian bus. Why should anyone believe that Russia is serious about peace when it strikes civilians on the very same day as peace talks begin?
Well, you know, the purpose for the negotiation came from Vladimir Putin directly, and he declared that was available to speak also with Zelensky, and this is a big message because it's common in the Russian media to see declaration also from the authorities about the strange position of Zelensky, because for someone, Zelensky is not the legitimate president of Ukraine because his mandate was expired last May. So if Vladimir Putin,
but Andrea, his country is at war. I'm just saying that under martial law, elections tend to not take place, and Ukraine is currently under martial law, meaning that there is no elections held in the country. Saying that's the information.
But for someone in big position in Russia, Zelensky is not more a legitimate president. And if Vladimir Putin agreed to speak with him, this is it's a meaning that for Vladimir Putin, Zelensky is the president, the leader of Ukraine. So also this is a very important message. About the attack against civilians and cities in Ukraine, this is the war. This can happen, and it's not. I'm not sure about the dynamic of the attack that you quote right now, because it's very common that the debris from anti-aircraft system, anti-aircraft weapons can fall above peoples and civilians. Sumy is a city very close to the front line, and it's not the first time that Russian weapons hit the city, but not against civilians, but against, this is the Russian declaration and the declaration of the Ministry of Defense of Moscow, against the military-industrial complex of Ukraine that now operated also under civilians building for build drones and light weapons.
Yes, some would say the timing of this is coincidental, but others would say it could be deliberate, maybe possibly a signal to Kiev that peace will only come on Russia's terms. What do you say to that?
From the negotiation out, it's very clear that the Russian side does not want to reconsider its demands about, for example, the claimed territory, about the request to Ukraine to stay neutral in the geopolitical view in Europe, so non-NATO for Ukraine, maybe yes to European Union, and also the denazification, that's mean the completely disassembled of any extreme or right wings connected regiment or battalion.
I do apologize, Andrea,
Ukraine.
but I believe we have run out of time. Thank you very much for joining us on the program as always. We now move on over to the United States, where President Donald Trump returned from the Middle East with a mix of bold moves, foreign policy risks, and a few surprises. In a major shift, Trump announced the US would drop sanctions against Syria, but later in the week, Secretary of State Marco Rubio clarified the move starts with a temporary waiver. Permanent repeal would need Congress. Meanwhile, Trump failed to get Russian President Vladimir Putin to Istanbul for the Ukraine peace talks. Trump, who had teased attending himself, was left dangling. Talks ended without a breakthrough, although a 1,000-person prisoner swap was approved. Trump claims Putin is ready to negotiate, also blames Ukraine's Zelensky for being too rigid. Trump, in an exclusive interview to Fox, talked about Zelensky and said that he doesn't have the cards to win. He also warned that if no deal is made, the US will impose crushing sanctions on Moscow. Let's listen in to all he said.
Well, I will. If I do, honestly, I will. If we're not going to make a deal, we're going to see whether or not this is Turkey time. You know, this is now we're talking Turkey, and we'll see what happens. That would be crushing for Russia because they're having a hard time now with the economy. I have a very good relationship with Putin. I think we'll make a deal. We have to get together, and I think we'll probably schedule it because I'm tired of having other people go.
And on the trade end of the spectrum, Trump said India is ready to eliminate tariffs on US goods, but downplayed the urgency on a formal deal. Let's listen in to what he said on the matter.
Once, you know, they're one of the highest taxed or tariff nations in the world. They make it almost impossible to do business. Do you know that they're willing to cut 100% of their tariffs for the United States because of what I did? Is that deal coming soon? Yeah, that'll come soon.
Moving on now, the US Supreme Court has decided to keep in place its block on President Donald Trump's deportations of Venezuelan migrants under a 1798 wartime law called the Alien Enemies Act, citing a lack of adequate legal process. In a brief, unsigned opinion, the court sided with the American Civil Liberties Union, which argued that migrants were being removed without sufficient notice or the opportunity to challenge their deportation. The decision prompted a sharp reaction from President Trump, who took to social media to criticize the court's ruling. He called it a bad and dangerous day for America, claiming the Supreme Court is blocking him from doing what he was elected to do. Trump argued that the ruling will make it harder to deport migrants who he claims have committed crimes. In a separate development, a federal judge expressed frustration at the Trump administration for failing to provide adequate details about his efforts to return a man who was wrongly deported to El Salvador. U.S. District Judge Paula Sinis said the government has not provided sufficient information from top officials on how it plans to comply with her order to facilitate the return of Kilmar Arbredo Garcia. We now move over to the Middle East, where the Israeli military has said that it has launched extensive strikes in the Gaza Strip over the past 24 hours as part of the initial stages of a fresh offensive on the besieged Palestinian territory. Israel's army said in a statement that the strikes were part of the expansion of the battle in the Gaza Strip with the goal of achieving all the war's objectives, including the release of the abducted and the defeat of Hamas. According to reports, thousands of Palestinians have been ordered by Israeli forces to flee parts of northern Gaza as indiscriminate airstrikes killed at least 115 people in the territory since dawn on Friday, according to reports. The offensive, known as Operation Gideon's Chariots, comes as Israel faces pressure to lift a sweeping aid blockade in return for a US-Israeli hostage released by Hamas. United Nations aid chief Tom Fletcher has said that time should not be wasted on an alternative US-backed proposal to deliver aid to Gaza. He added that the UN has a proven plan and 160,000 pallets of relief ready to enter the Palestinian enclave now. Fletcher earlier this week had questioned whether Israel would act decisively to prevent genocide in the Gaza Strip. In a letter to Fletcher on Friday, Israel's United Nations ambassador, Danny Danon, accused him of delivering a political sermon and weaponizing the word genocide against Israel. This comes as the US President Donald Trump's administration is working on a plan to permanently relocate as much as 1 million Palestinians from the Gaza Strip to Libya, according to reports. Meanwhile, Trump has said that a lot of people are starving in Gaza, as a global hunger monitor reportedly warned that 500,000 people face starvation. He also gave comments on the Israeli Prime Minister, calling him an angry man who has fought hard and bravely. Here's what he said.
We're going to see what happens. I think a lot of good things are going to happen over the next month, and we're going to see. We have to help also out the Palestinians. You know, a lot of people are starving on Gaza, so we have to look at both sides. But we're going to do a good job. I think I can say that Bibi, he's an angry man, and he should be because of October 7th. And he's been hurt badly by that, but in another way he's been sort of helped because I think he's fought hard and bravely.
Staying in the Middle East, Israel has launched fresh strikes on Yemen's Red Sea ports of Hodeidah and Salif on Friday, its latest move to crush the Houthi group's ability to fire missiles towards the country. Israeli military said it dropped over 30 munitions on Houthi targets in what's now its 8th strike on Yemen. Israel claims the ports were being used to transfer weapons and once again warned civilians to evacuate. The Houthi-run health ministry said at least one person was killed and 9 others were injured. Residents reported hearing loud explosions and seeing smoke rising over Hodeidah. Israel's leadership is now taking direct aim at the group's top figure, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Israel Katz. They warned that Houthi leader Abdulmalik al-Houthi could be the next militant killed, comparing him to Hamas's Sinwar and Hezbollah's Nasrallah. Senior Houthi official Mohammed Ali al-Houthi dismissed the threats as illusions, accusing Israel of settling unrealistic goals to buy time. The Houthis, backed by Iran, are part of a wider alliance that includes Hamas and Hezbollah. Since the Gaza war began last October, the group has launched dozens of attacks towards Israel, most intercepted or falling short. Though the Houthis recently agreed to halt attacks on US ships, their strikes on Israel show no signs of stopping. Here's what the Defense Minister and Prime Minister said.
כמו שאמרנו, אם החות'ים ימשיכו לירות טילים לעבר מדינת ישראל, הם ייפגעו קשות ונפגע גם במנהיגים. כמו שעשינו לדף ולסינוארים בעזה, לנסראללה בביירות ולהניע בטהרן, כך נעשה גם לעבד אל-מלק אל-חותי בתימן.
הטייסים שלנו עכשיו תקפו בהצלחה שוב 2 נמלי טרור של החות'ים. זה רק ההמשך, ויבוא המשך. אנחנו לא מוכנים לשבת בצד ולתת לחות'ים לפגוע בנו, אנחנו נפגע בהם הרבה יותר, כולל בהנהגה שלהם, כולל בכל התשתיות שמאפשרות להם לפגוע בנו.
More updates coming out of the Middle East. Iran's foreign minister is pushing back on US President Donald Trump's claim that a new nuclear deal proposal has been formally submitted to Tehran. Speaking on social media, Abbas Araghchi called the US messaging confusing and contradictory, saying Iran has received no written offer, neither directly nor indirectly. This comes after President Trump, speaking aboard Air Force One, said Washington had formally proposed a new agreement and urged Iran to move quickly. Araghchi stressed that Iran would never abandon its right to enrich uranium for peaceful purposes under the Non-Proliferation Treaty. He added that Iran remains committed to a deal if the US lifts sanctions and respects its rights. Trump has said he's open to a civilian nuclear program in Iran, but not a nuclear weapon, and has hinted that trade could be used as a tool to reach peace. The Arab League is gathering in Baghdad today to discuss the war in Gaza and other regional crises, with key leaders expected to skip the talks following US President Donald Trump's Gulf tour. Trump had earlier stirred a controversy by declaring that America would take over Gaza and transform it into a Riviera of the Middle East, prompting Arab states to formulate a rebuilding plan at a March summit in Cairo. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas was the first to arrive in Baghdad, though most Gulf nations are sending ministers. Iraqi officials say the summit will endorse the Cairo decisions instead of Trump's proposal. United Nations Chief Antonio Guterres and Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez are also among those attending the summit, with Sanchez expected to address the summit directly. Syria's interim president Ahmed al-Shara will also not attend this summit, following backlash from Iraqi politicians. Damascus will be represented by Foreign Minister Assad al-Shaibani. Now we move over to Southeast Asia, where Vietnam and the United States held their first direct ministerial level negotiations yesterday against the backdrop of an impending US tariff of 46% on imports from the Southeast Asian nation. The Vietnamese Trade Ministry said in a statement released today that the meeting, which occurred in Jeju, South Korea, symbolized both nations' commitment to fostering a stable economic, trade and investment partnership. The talks follow a phone call last month between Vietnamese Trade Minister Nguyen Hong Dien and US Trade Representative Jamieson Greer that officially started negotiations. The Trade Ministry's statement said that Korea agreed with Vietnamese current approach and proposal. It also stated that with the mutual efforts, the technical level negotiations in the coming days will yield positive results. The US has postponed the implementation of the 46% tariff on Vietnam until July. If enforced, the levy could disrupt growth in Vietnam, which is heavily dependent on sales to the United States, its largest export market, and substantial foreign investments in manufacturing goods for export. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has supervised Air Force drills, calling for a breakthrough in war preparation across the entire military. According to state media, Kim expected airstrike and anti-aircraft combat exercises, underscoring the need for enhanced combat readiness. Footage aired on North Korean television showed a MiG-29 jet firing what analysts say resembled a Russian-made mid to long-range air-to-air missile. This marks Kim's latest display of military activity, including missile tests and tank drills. Moving on once again, South Korea's ousted former President Yoon Suk-yeol has said that he is leaving the Conservative People's Power Party, according to his Facebook post. The announcement comes as the PPP's presidential candidate is reportedly badly trailing Liberal Democratic Party candidate Lee Jae-myung in the polls before the June 3rd snap election. According to a Gallup Korea poll released on Friday, some 29% supported PPP presidential candidate Kim Moon-soo, compared to 51% for frontrunner Lee. Yoon, whose December surprise martial law and subsequent impeachment brought about the snap presidential election, had been called by members to leave the party in an effort to muster more support from moderate voters who negatively view his actions. Yoon said in his post that he is leaving the People Power Party to fulfill his responsibility to protect the Free Republic of Korea, and asked the readers to lend your support to PPP's Kim Moon-soo. Meanwhile, candidates Lee and Kim are set to face off in their first televised debate on Sunday. We move on once again. British Foreign Minister David Lammy has said that the UK is working closely with the United States to ensure the ceasefire between India and Pakistan remains in place. Speaking in Islamabad at the end of his two-day visit to Pakistan, Lammy emphasised the importance of sustained dialogue and confidence-building measures between the two countries. The ceasefire agreement between the two states was announced on May the 10th. The escalation came after Pakistani and Pakistani-backed terrorists killed 26 civilians. Lammy also urged both sides to honour their treaty obligations following India's suspension of the Indus Waters Treaty. In Libya, protests erupted today in the capital Tripoli as hundreds demanded the resignation of Prime Minister Abdulhamid Dbeibah. The demonstrators rallied in Martyrs Square, chanting for elections and the fall of the government. Tensions escalated when protesters tried to storm the Prime Minister's office. One security officer was also killed. The unrest comes days after heavy clashes between rival armed groups rocked the capital, the worst fighting in years, killing 8 civilians. 3 ministers resigned on Friday in support of the protests, while demonstrators accused Dbeibah of failing to restore law and order and enabling militia control. Libya's government blamed saboteurs for the violence and released footage of a damaged government fence. Protesters carried pictures of Dbeibah and top officials with their faces crossed out in red. Let's listen to what some of the protesters said.
هنا من أجل مطالبة بإسقاط هذه الحكومة وتشكيل حكومة وحدة وطنية لتوافق وطنية يتم الاتفاق عليها، كذلك يطالبوا بفك التشكيلات المسلحة.
الليبيين يريدون دولة ديمقراطية مبنية على الحق والعدالة والمؤسسات، لا نريد أي كلام ثاني. فيا إخواني نحن لم نخرج إلا لنصرة.
The United Nations voiced concern over the escalation and urged all sides to protect civilians. Libya has faced instability since the fall of Muammar Gaddafi in 2011, with Tripoli long divided among armed factions. Calls for elections and for Dbeibah to step down are growing louder. Well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring you more news updates from around the world.